My name is Rowan Kerrick, and I'm about to tell you how I dismantled my wife's perfect little world piece by piece. Not with violence, not with screaming, with precision. The kind that comes from 15 years analyzing financial portfolios and understanding that every system has vulnerabilities. It started on a Tuesday morning in October. I was reviewing quarterly reports in my home office when my phone buzzed with a notification from our security system. Motion detected at the front door. Nothing unusual there, except Brielle had left for her wellness retreat 3 days ago and wasn't supposed to return until Friday. I pulled up the camera feed and watched my wife of 12 years step through our front door. She wasn't alone. The man behind her, adjusting his expensive suit jacket and running fingers through his salt and pepper hair, was my older brother Keaton. They moved through our living room with the casual intimacy of people who'd done this before. Brielle kicked off her designer heels, the ones I'd bought her for our anniversary, and Keaton loosened his tie. They were talking, laughing, completely comfortable in what they assumed was an empty house. I sat there in my office chair, watching them through the security monitor, and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not rage, not heartbreak, something much more dangerous. Clarity. See, I'm good at my job because I notice patterns. Market fluctuations, investment trends, the subtle shifts that tell you when something's about to collapse. And watching my wife and brother together, I could see all the patterns I'd been missing. The late nights Brielle claimed were yoga classes. Keaton's sudden interest in our marriage, asking pointed questions about our happiness, the way they'd both grown distant from me over the past 6 months. I minimized the security feed and opened a new spreadsheet. Time to start documenting. Over the next hour, I compiled everything. Credit card statements showing charges at restaurants I'd never been to, hotel receipts from Brielle's solo trips, phone records with lengthy calls to Keaton during times she'd claimed to be in meetings. The evidence painted a picture so clear it could have been a PowerPoint presentation. My phone rang. Brielle's contact photo, a selfie of her laughing at some charity gala, filled the screen. "Hey, honey," she said, her voice bright and artificial. "Just wanted to check in. The retreat is amazing. Really finding myself here." "That's wonderful," I replied, watching her pace around our kitchen on the monitor. "Where exactly are you finding yourself?" "Oh, just the mountains. Very spiritual. Lots of meditation." Keaton appeared in the frame, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. She leaned into him, tilting her head back against his shoulder while talking to me. "Well, don't find yourself too hard," I said. "You might get lost." She laughed, that tinkling sound that used to make me smile. "You're so funny, Rowan. I'll be home Friday, okay? Love you." "Love you too," I said, and ended the call. I spent the rest of the day planning. Not plotting revenge, not yet. Just understanding the scope of what I was dealing with. I pulled financial records, reviewed insurance policies, checked joint accounts. What I found made the betrayal even worse. Brielle hadn't just been unfaithful. She'd been preparing to leave me. Money had been quietly moved from our joint savings into an account with only her name. She'd been consulting with divorce attorneys. I found the retainer agreement buried in her email. She'd even started apartment hunting in the upscale district where Keaton lived. But here's where it gets interesting. She hadn't filed yet. She was waiting for something. I spent another hour digging through documents until I found what she was waiting for. Keaton's latest medical records, carelessly left in a shared cloud folder. My brother, successful venture capitalist, owner of a downtown penthouse, driver of a Tesla Model S, was sick. Not just sick. Terminally ill with a degenerative condition that would require round-the-clock care within 2 years. The medical bills alone would bankrupt most people. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Suddenly, Brielle's timeline made sense. She was planning to leave me after Keaton's condition became public knowledge. She'd get half our assets in the divorce, then disappear before becoming responsible for his care. Clean break, maximum profit, minimal liability. I closed my laptop and walked to the kitchen, made myself a sandwich, opened a beer, sat at the counter where my wife and brother had been standing an hour ago. The house felt different now, not like a home, but like a crime scene waiting to be processed. My phone buzzed with a text from my friend Jake. "Drinks tonight? You look like you could use one." I smiled for the first time all day. Jake worked in cybersecurity, had a talent for finding information that people preferred to keep hidden. He also had a twisted sense of humor and absolutely no patience for cheaters. "Definitely," I texted back. "I've got a project I could use your help with." "What kind of project?" I looked around our kitchen, at the photos of Brielle and me on our wedding day, at the expensive appliances she'd insisted we needed, at the life we'd built together that she was systematically dismantling. The kind that requires careful planning and perfect execution, I typed. Bring your laptop. 3 hours later, Jake and I sat in my office with Chinese takeout containers and 2 laptops between us. I'd shown him everything, the security footage, the financial records, Keaton's medical files, Brielle's escape plan. Holy hell, Rowan, he said, shaking his head. This is like a masterclass in betrayal. She's been planning this for months. 6 months minimum, I confirmed. Maybe longer. The question is, what do we do about it? Jake grinned, cracking his knuckles. We give her exactly what she's planning to take from you, but we make sure she gets everything she deserves. Meaning? Meaning if she wants out of this marriage, she should get out. But she should also get full responsibility for the mess she's creating, including your brother's medical situation. I leaned back in my chair, considering. That's actually brilliant. She wants to play games with contracts and legal obligations? Let's see how she handles being on the wrong side of them. Exactly. We make it so she can't leave without taking full responsibility for Keaton. Legally, financially, socially. She wanted to be with him? She gets to be with him through everything that's coming. We spent the next 4 hours planning. Jake handled the technical aspects, securing evidence, protecting my assets, setting up digital trails that would lead investigators exactly where we wanted them to look. I focused on the legal and financial elements, identifying every point of leverage we could use. By midnight, we had a comprehensive strategy. It wasn't about revenge, exactly. It was about consequences. Natural, logical, perfectly legal consequences for the choices Brielle and Keaton had made. You sure you want to do this? Jake asked as he packed up his equipment. Once we start, there's no going back. This will change everything. I thought about that security footage, about the casual way they'd moved through my home, about the months of lies and planning and preparation for my destruction. They already changed everything, I said. I'm just making sure they own the results. After Jake left, I sat alone in my office, looking at the detailed timeline we'd created. Phase 1 would begin tomorrow. By the time Brielle returned from her fake retreat, the landscape of her carefully planned future would be completely different. I opened my laptop and started typing the first email. Wednesday morning, I called in sick to work. Not entirely a lie. I was sick of being played for a fool, and I had a condition that required immediate treatment, terminal naivety. My first stop was downtown, to the office of Patricia Hawkins, the divorce attorney Brielle had been secretly consulting. I'd made an appointment under my own name, claiming I needed to discuss potential marital issues. Patricia was exactly what I'd expected from her website photos. Sharp-eyed, expensively dressed, with the kind of smile that calculated billable hours while expressing sympathy. Her office overlooked the financial district, all glass and steel, and implied success. Mr. Kerrick, she said, gesturing to a leather chair across from her massive desk, I understand you're concerned about your marriage. Concerned is one way to put it, I said, settling into the chair. I've discovered my wife has been consulting with a divorce attorney. Imagine my surprise when I learned it was you. Her professional smile faltered slightly. I'm not sure what you're implying. I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. I pulled out a folder and placed it on her desk. Retainer agreement, dated 6 weeks ago. Email correspondence discussing asset division strategies. Meeting notes about timing the filing for maximum advantage. Patricia's face went carefully neutral. Mr. Kerrick, I can't discuss. You don't need to discuss anything. I just need you to understand something. I leaned forward. My wife is planning to leave me for my brother, who happens to be terminally ill with a condition that will require expensive, round-the-clock care. She's been moving assets and timing her exit to avoid any responsibility for his situation. That makes her not just an unfaithful wife, but a pretty terrible person. Even if that were true, I don't see how... Here's how it affects you. I'm going to make sure that when this all comes out, and it will come out, everyone knows exactly what kind of person you helped. The kind who abandoned sick family members for financial gain. Probably not great for your reputation in a city this size. I stood up, leaving the folder on her desk. Of course, if Brielle were to find herself without legal representation, she might make some poor decisions. Might agree to things that aren't in her best interest, might end up taking on obligations she's trying to avoid. Patricia opened the folder, scanning the documents. Her face grew paler with each page. What exactly are you asking me to do? Nothing unethical, I said. Just maybe suggest that her current strategy isn't as foolproof as she thinks. Maybe recommend she consider the long-term implications of her choices. Maybe help her understand that sometimes the best way to get what you want is to be very careful about what you wish for. I left Patricia's office with a handshake and the distinct impression that Brielle's legal strategy was about to become much less aggressive. My next stop was Keaton's office building, a gleaming tower in the heart of the business district. I didn't go up to see him. That would come later. Instead, I visited the building's management company on the ground floor. "I'm here about my brother's lease," I told the property manager, a nervous man named Dennis who clearly spent more time with spreadsheets than people. "Keaton Marin, Suite 2847. I need to discuss adding myself as a guarantor." Dennis pulled up the file on his computer. "Is Mr. Marin having financial difficulties?" "Not yet," I said, "but he's dealing with some health issues that might affect his income. As his brother, I want to make sure his obligations are covered." What Dennis didn't need to know was that by adding myself as a guarantor, I was also gaining access to information about Keaton's financial commitments. More importantly, I was creating a legal connection that would become very useful in the coming weeks. "This is quite generous of you," Dennis said, printing out forms. "Not many people would take on this kind of responsibility for a family member." "Family is important," I replied, signing my name with a flourish. "You have to take care of the people you love, even when they don't deserve it. Especially when they don't deserve it." From there, I drove to Mercy General Hospital, where Keaton had been receiving treatment. I'd called ahead and made an appointment with the financial counselor, claiming I needed to discuss payment options for my brother's ongoing care. Margaret Chen was a kind woman in her 50s who'd clearly spent years helping families navigate medical crises. She welcomed me into her small office with genuine warmth. "It's wonderful that your brother has family support," she said, pulling up Keaton's account. "Many patients facing his condition don't have that advantage." "What kind of costs are we looking at?" I asked. Margaret's expression grew serious. "For his condition, once it progresses to the next stage, we're talking about extensive in-home care, specialized equipment, medications that aren't fully covered by insurance. Conservatively, $200,000 per year, potentially much more." I nodded gravely. "And if someone were to become his legal guardian or medical proxy, they'd be responsible for those costs." "If they have the financial means, yes. The state requires family members to contribute to care costs before public assistance kicks in." "What about spouses? If he were to marry?" "Spouses have even greater responsibility. They'd be fully liable for medical expenses, and their assets would be considered when determining eligibility for assistance programs." I thanked Margaret for her time and left the hospital with a much clearer understanding of what Brielle was walking into. She thought she was getting a wealthy venture capitalist. What she was actually getting was a $250,000 annual liability that would drain her resources for years. That evening, I cooked dinner and waited for Jake to arrive with the results of his digital investigation. He showed up at 7 with a laptop bag and a grim expression. "You're not going to like what I found," he said, setting up his computer on my dining room table. "Show me." Jake pulled up a series of screenshots. "They've been planning this for almost a year. Look at this email thread between Brielle and her sister." I read over his shoulder. The emails were damning. Discussions about getting out of our marriage, speculation about how much she could expect from a divorce, even jokes about my boring personality and lack of ambition. But the worst part was a message from 3 months ago. "Keaton's condition is actually perfect timing. R will be so focused on family drama, he won't see the divorce coming until it's too late. Plus, K will need someone to take care of him, and it might as well be someone who benefits from his will." "She's not just leaving you," Jake said quietly. "She's planning to inherit everything when Keaton passes. She thinks she's found the perfect setup. Dump the boring husband, nurse the rich brother through his illness, inherit his money." I stared at the screen, feeling that cold clarity settle over me again. She has no idea what she's actually signing up for. None whatsoever, and it gets better. Jake pulled up another file. I found the apartment she's been looking at. Lease application, credit check, the works. She's planning to move out the day after she files for divorce. When? Based on her email calendar, she's planning to file next Friday, the day after she gets back from her fake retreat. I sat back in my chair, processing the timeline. So she comes home, pretends everything is normal for exactly 1 day, then serves me with papers and moves in with Keaton. That's the plan, except now we're going to make sure she gets exactly what she wants, but not the way she expects. Jake spent the next hour showing me what he'd prepared. Financial records that would make Brielle's asset hiding obvious to any judge. Evidence of her affair that would eliminate any claim to alimony. Most importantly, legal documents that would make her fully responsible for Keaton's care if she chose to be with him. "The beauty of this," Jake explained, "is that we're not actually doing anything to her. We're just making sure she faces the natural consequences of her choices. She wants to be with Keaton? Great. She gets to be with him through everything that entails. And if she tries to back out? Then she loses everything anyway, because all of this evidence becomes public record in the divorce proceedings. Either way, she pays for what she's done. I looked at the evidence spread across my dining room table. Months of lies, betrayal, and manipulation laid out in neat digital files. Tomorrow, I would start implementing our plan. By the time Brielle returned from her retreat, her perfect future would be transformed into something very different. "Jake," I said, "I owe you dinner for this." "You owe me nothing," he replied, packing up his laptop. "Cheaters deserve what they get. Besides, this is going to be fun to watch." After he left, I sat alone with the evidence, thinking about the woman I'd married 12 years ago. Had she always been capable of this level of deception? Or had I simply never given her reason to show it? Did it matter? Tomorrow, Brielle would wake up in whatever hotel room she was actually staying in, probably planning her next move with Keaton. She'd have no idea that her future had already been decided, not by me, but by the choices she'd made and the consequences she'd refused to consider. I opened my laptop and began typing the first of several emails that would set everything in motion. Thursday morning brought rain and the kind of gray sky that makes everything look like a crime scene. Perfect weather for what I had planned. My first call was to Brielle's sister, Emma, who lived across town with her husband and 2 kids. Emma had always been the responsible one in their family, the one who paid her bills on time, showed up when she said she would, and generally acted like an adult. She also had no patience for her sister's drama. "Rowan?" Emma sounded surprised to hear from me. "Is everything okay? Brielle said she was at some retreat." "That's actually what I'm calling about," I said. "I need to show you something, and I think you should see it before anyone else does." We met at a coffee shop near Emma's house. I brought a tablet loaded with the evidence Jake had compiled, the emails, the financial records, the timeline of deception. Emma's face went through several expressions as she scrolled through it all. Confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally disgust. "She's really doing this?" Emma asked, staring at an email where Brielle joked about my pathetic attempts to save our marriage. "She's really doing this. The question is, do you want to be collateral damage when it all comes out?" Emma looked up from the tablet. "What do you mean?" "I mean your sister is about to make some very public, very expensive mistakes. When the divorce gets ugly, and it will get ugly, she's going to need money and support. She's going to come to you first. And Keaton's medical condition is going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. If she marries him, she becomes legally responsible for those costs. When his money runs out, she's going to expect family help." Emma's face went pale. "We can't afford that. We've got our own kids to think about." "I know. That's why I'm giving you a heads up. When she comes asking for help, you'll know exactly what she's asking you to pay for." I left Emma with copies of the most damning evidence and a promise to keep her informed about developments. Having Brielle's own sister aware of the situation would eliminate one potential source of support when things got difficult. My next stop was Keaton's business partner, David Richardson. David ran the day-to-day operations of their venture capital firm while Keaton handled client relationships and deal-making. I'd met David at several family gatherings over the years and always found him to be straightforward and practical, exactly the kind of person who would understand the implications of what I was about to show him. "Rowan," David said, welcoming me into his office. "Good to see you. How's Keaton doing? He's been distant lately." "That's what I wanted to talk to you about." I sat across from his desk and pulled out another tablet. "I think you should know what's been going on." David's reaction was even stronger than Emma's. As a business partner, he immediately understood the financial and legal implications of Keaton's situation. "Jesus Christ," he muttered, reading through Keaton's medical records. "He never told me it was this serious." "There's more." I showed him the evidence of the affair, the timeline of deception, Brielle's plans to inherit Keaton's assets. David leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair. "This is a nightmare. If Keaton's judgment is this compromised, if he's making personal decisions this reckless..." "It raises questions about his business decisions, too," I finished. "Exactly. Our clients trust us with millions of dollars. If word gets out that one of the partners is involved in this kind of mess, it could destroy the firm." I let that sink in for a moment. What if there was a way to minimize the damage? To make sure Keaton's personal problems don't affect the business? "I'm listening." "Keaton needs to step back from client-facing work. Medical leave, maybe early retirement. You take over his responsibilities, and the firm continues operating normally. Meanwhile, his personal situation gets resolved quietly." David nodded slowly. "And his ownership stake?" "That depends on how cooperative he is. If he's willing to be reasonable, maybe he retains some equity but no operational control. If he fights it, I shrugged. Well, the evidence I've shown you would probably interest your other investors. We spent another hour discussing the details. By the time I left David's office, Keaton's professional life was as precarious as his personal one. That afternoon, I drove to the luxury apartment complex where Brielle had been planning to move. The leasing agent, a young woman named Ashley, was eager to help when I explained I was looking for information about my wife's application. "Oh, yes, Mrs. Kerrick," Ashley said, pulling up the file on her computer. She seemed very excited about the unit, said she was going through a major life change and wanted a fresh start. I'm sure she did. The thing is, there's been a development in our financial situation. My brother, he's the one who was going to co-sign the lease, has been diagnosed with a serious medical condition. It's going to affect his ability to guarantee rent payments. Ashley's smile faltered. "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that." "The medical bills are going to be substantial, hundreds of thousands per year. If my wife goes through with this lease, she might find herself unable to pay rent within a few months. That's concerning. I thought you should know, as a professional courtesy. The last thing anyone wants is a tenant who can't meet their obligations." I left the leasing office confident that Brielle's housing situation had become much more complicated. That evening, Jake came over with updates on the digital side of our operation. "I've been monitoring their communications," he reported, setting up his laptop at my kitchen table. "They're getting nervous. Look at this text thread from yesterday." He showed me a series of messages between Brielle and Keaton. Brielle: "R has been asking weird questions about money lately. Do you think he suspects something?" Keaton: "Just stick to the plan. One more day, and then we're free." Brielle: "I can't wait to get out of here. This house feels like a prison." Keaton: "Soon you'll be somewhere that appreciates you." "They have no idea what's waiting for them," Jake said with satisfaction. "Speaking of which, how are the financial arrangements coming?" Jake grinned. "Beautiful. I've set up automatic transfers that will activate the moment Brielle files for divorce. All the money she's been hiding will immediately become part of a trust fund for Keaton's medical care, with her as the designated caregiver and financially responsible party. And if she refuses, then she loses access to the money anyway, and it becomes a legal matter. Either she takes care of Keaton and pays his bills, or she gets sued for abandonment and still loses the money." Perfect. We spent the evening fine-tuning the final details. Tomorrow, Brielle would return from her fake retreat, expecting to find everything exactly as she'd left it. Instead, she'd discover that her carefully constructed plan had been systematically dismantled. "You know," Jake said as he packed up his equipment, "most people would just confront their cheating spouse and file for divorce." "Most people don't marry someone capable of this level of planning and deception," I replied. "Brielle isn't just unfaithful, she's calculating. She deserves consequences that match her actions." "And your brother?" I thought about Keaton, about the years of competition and resentment between us, about how easily he'd betrayed family loyalty for the chance to take something that belonged to me. Keaton made his choice when he decided to help destroy my marriage. Now he gets to live with someone who sees him as a financial opportunity rather than a person. Seems like exactly what he deserves. After Jake left, I walked through my house one last time as a married man living in ignorance. Tomorrow, everything would change. Brielle would come home expecting to find her husband waiting to be blindsided by divorce papers. Instead, she'd find someone who knew exactly what she'd been planning and had prepared accordingly. I went to bed that night with a clear conscience and a detailed plan. Tomorrow would be very interesting indeed. Friday evening, I sat in my living room with a glass of wine and a folder full of documents, waiting for my wife to come home from her fictional retreat. The house was spotless, dinner was in the oven, and everything looked exactly as it should for a loving husband welcoming his wife back from a spiritual journey. Except for the envelope on the coffee table. Brielle's key turned in the lock at exactly 6:30. She came through the door looking refreshed and radiant, carrying a designer duffel bag and wearing the kind of serene expression people get from expensive spa treatments. "Honey, I'm home," she called out, her voice bright with false enthusiasm. "In here," I replied. She appeared in the living room doorway, and I watched her face carefully as she took in the scene, me sitting calmly with my wine, the folder in my lap, the envelope on the table. "How was your retreat?" I asked. "Oh, it was amazing, so rejuvenating. I feel like a completely new person." She set down her bag and moved toward me, leaning down for what I assumed was supposed to be a loving kiss. I didn't move. "That's wonderful," I said. "I'm glad you found what you were looking for." Something in my tone made her straighten up. "Is everything okay? You seem different." "Different how?" "I don't know. Distant, maybe?" I took a sip of wine and gestured toward the envelope. Why don't you sit down? We need to talk. Brielle's eyes flicked to the envelope, then back to my face. What's that? Open it. She sat on the edge of the couch, as far from me as possible while still being on the same piece of furniture. Her hands shook slightly as she picked up the envelope and tore it open. The first thing she pulled out was a photograph, a security camera still of her and Keaton entering our house on Tuesday. Her face went completely white. Rowan, I can explain. Keep looking. She pulled out more photos, bank statements showing her hidden account, copies of emails discussing divorce strategy, medical records detailing Keaton's condition. With each piece of evidence, she seemed to shrink further into herself. How long have you known? She asked finally. Does it matter? I never meant for you to find out like this. How did you mean for me to find out? When you served me with divorce papers? When you moved in with my brother? When you started spending the money you've been hiding? Brielle set the papers aside and looked at me directly for the first time since she'd arrived. You don't understand. Keaton and I, it just happened. We never planned for this. I pulled out my phone and played an audio recording, one of her phone calls with her sister, discussing the timeline for leaving me and the financial benefits of being with Keaton. 18 months of planning, I said when the recording ended. That's a long time for something that just happened. You've been spying on me. I've been protecting myself. There's a difference. Brielle stood up and started pacing. Okay, fine. Yes, I've been seeing Keaton. Yes, I was planning to leave you. But you have to understand, our marriage has been over for years. We're like roommates, Rowan. There's no passion, no excitement. I was suffocating. So you decided to suffocate me instead. That's not what this is about. Isn't it? You've been systematically preparing to destroy my life while pretending to be a loving wife. You've stolen money, lied about your whereabouts, and planned to leave me with nothing while you start a new life with my brother. If that's not suffocation, what is? She stopped pacing and turned to face me. What do you want, Rowan? An apology? Fine. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I fell in love with someone else. I'm sorry I didn't have the courage to tell you sooner. I'm sorry our marriage didn't work out. I don't want an apology. Then what? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our neighborhood, the place where we'd planned to raise children, grow old together, build a life. I want you to understand what you're actually choosing. I'm choosing to be happy. You're choosing to be Keaton's caregiver for the next few years until his condition takes him. You're choosing to spend every penny you've saved, plus everything you think you'll get from our divorce, on medical bills and specialized care. You're choosing to watch someone you think you love deteriorate while bankrupting yourself in the process. Brielle's face went pale again. What are you talking about? I turned back to her. Keaton didn't tell you how serious his condition is, did he? He didn't mention the part about needing round-the-clock care, or the medications that cost more than most people's mortgages, or the fact that his insurance covers maybe 20% of what he'll actually need. You're lying. I pulled out another folder and handed it to her. Medical records, financial projections, legal documents outlining spousal responsibility for healthcare costs. It's all there. She opened the folder with trembling hands. I watched her read through the documents, watched the realization dawn on her face. $200,000 per year, I said quietly. Minimum, for someone who'll need increasing levels of care and won't be able to contribute financially. That's what you're signing up for. He has money. The business that his partner is about to force him out of because of his compromised judgment. The business that can't afford to be associated with this kind of personal scandal. Brielle sank back onto the couch, the folder sliding from her hands. You did this. You sabotaged everything. I didn't sabotage anything. I just made sure the people who needed to know the truth actually knew it. Your sister knows about your plans. Keaton's business partner knows about his condition and your affair. The apartment complex knows about the financial risks. Everyone knows exactly what they're dealing with. Why? The word came out as barely a whisper. Because actions have consequences. You wanted to play games with people's lives, manipulate situations for your own benefit, treat marriage like a business transaction. Fine, but you don't get to do that without facing the results. I sat back down, close enough to see the tears starting to form in her eyes. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to move in with Keaton just like you planned. You're going to take full responsibility for his care, just like a devoted partner should. And you're going to use every penny of that money you've been hiding to pay for his medical needs. And if I don't, then you lose the money anyway, because it's all going into a trust fund for Keaton's care. The only way you get access to it is by being his designated caregiver. If you abandon him, you get sued for financial abandonment and still lose everything. Brielle stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. I never knew you could be this cruel. I'm not being cruel. I'm being logical. You made choices, and now you get to live with them. You want to be with Keaton? Congratulations. You get to be with him through everything that entails. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. What about us? What about our marriage? Our marriage ended the first time you decided to betray it. Everything since then has just been paperwork. The next hour was ugly. Brielle cried, pleaded, tried to negotiate, accused me of vindictiveness. I sat through it all with the patience of someone who'd already processed every emotion she was just discovering. Finally, she asked the question I'd been waiting for. What if I choose differently? What if I end things with Keaton and try to save our marriage? Then you still lose everything, because I'll never trust you again. The only difference is that you'll lose it as my ex-wife instead of as Keaton's caregiver. So either way, I'm trapped. No, I said. Either way, you're responsible for your choices. There's a difference. As the evening wore on, I watched my wife of 12 years transform from the confident woman who'd walked through the door into someone I barely recognized, defeated, desperate, calculating new angles even as her old plans crumbled. I need to call Keaton, she said finally. He already knows. David Richardson spoke with him this afternoon about his medical leave from the firm. I'm sure it was a very enlightening conversation. Brielle's phone rang, as if summoned. Keaton's name appeared on the screen. Answer it, I said. Put it on speaker. She looked at me with something approaching hatred, but she answered the call. Keaton? Brielle, thank God. We need to talk. Something's happened. David knows about us, about everything. He's forcing me out of the firm. I know. Rowan knows too. Silence on the other end of the line. How much does he know? Keaton asked finally. Everything. We need to accelerate our timeline. Can you get to my apartment tonight? Brielle looked at me. I nodded. Yes, she said. I'll be there in an hour. Good. We'll figure this out together. I love you. I love you too. She ended the call and stood up, gathering the scattered documents. This isn't over, she said. Yes, it is. You just haven't accepted it yet. She walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back to me. 12 years, Rowan. 12 years of marriage, and this is how it ends? With you manipulating and controlling everything? No, I said. This is how it ends with you finally facing the consequences of your actions. The manipulation and control were what you were doing to me. She left without another word, taking her designer bag and her shattered plans with her. I sat alone in our living room, surrounded by the evidence of her betrayal and the ruins of our marriage. Outside, it was starting to rain again. I poured myself another glass of wine and waited for Jake to call with confirmation that the final pieces of our plan were falling into place. Tomorrow, Brielle would wake up in Keaton's apartment, officially responsible for $250,000 in annual medical expenses, and legally bound to a man whose condition would only get worse. It was exactly what she'd wanted, just not the way she'd expected to get it. Saturday morning, my phone started ringing at 7 a.m. Jake's name on the caller ID. It's done, he said without preamble. The financial transfers activated automatically when she moved her stuff to Keaton's place last night. Every penny she's been hiding is now in the medical trust fund. And her access? Limited to healthcare expenses for Keaton, with full documentation required. She can't touch it for anything else. I made coffee and sat at my kitchen table, looking out at the empty driveway where Brielle's car used to be parked. The house felt different, not lonely exactly, but quiet, in a way it hadn't been for months. There's more, Jake continued. I've been monitoring their communications. They spent most of last night arguing about money and legal options. Keaton's finally understanding what his medical situation actually costs, and Brielle's realizing she's trapped. Any chance they'll try to fight back? With what? All their evidence leads back to their own deception. Any legal action they take just exposes more of what they've been doing. My doorbell rang as I was finishing the call. Through the window, I could see Emma standing on my front porch, looking grim. That's Brielle's sister, I told Jake. I'll call you back. Emma came in looking like she'd been up all night. She accepted a cup of coffee and sat across from me at the kitchen table. Brielle called me at midnight, she said, crying, hysterical, begging for money. What did you tell her? I told her I knew exactly what she'd done and that she was on her own. Emma took a sip of coffee and studied my face. She said you destroyed her life. I gave her exactly what she wanted. She wanted to be with Keaton. She wanted out of our marriage. She wanted to start fresh. Now she has all of that. Along with $250,000 in annual medical bills. Along with the natural consequences of her choices. Emma nodded slowly. She asked me to talk to you, to see if there was any way to undo this. What do you think? I think my sister made her bed, and now she gets to lie in it. But I also think," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "I think you're scarier than I ever realized." How so? Most people would have just filed for divorce and moved on. You orchestrated this entire situation so she'd get exactly what she deserves. That takes a level of planning and patience that's honestly terrifying. I considered that. Would you rather I just let her get away with it? No, but I'm glad you're not my enemy. Emma left after an hour, taking with her a promise to stay out of whatever happened next between Brielle and me. One less source of support for my soon-to-be ex-wife. Around noon, David Richardson called. "Keaton's officially on medical leave as of yesterday," he reported. "He didn't fight it, which suggests he understands how precarious his situation is." "How's the firm handling it?" "Better than expected. Most of our clients already knew something was wrong. He's been distracted and making poor decisions for months. Having him step back actually reassured people." "And his ownership stake?" "We're negotiating a buyout. Given his medical expenses, he needs the cash more than he needs equity in a business he can't actively participate in." Another piece falling into place. Keaton's professional life was effectively over, leaving him completely dependent on Brielle's care and the money she now controlled but couldn't access for personal use. That afternoon, I decided to drive past Keaton's apartment building. I wasn't planning to stop or make contact. I just wanted to see how they were adjusting to their new reality. I didn't have to wonder long. As I pulled into the parking lot, I saw Brielle and Keaton standing beside his Tesla, having what appeared to be an intense argument. Even from a distance, I could see the tension in their body language. I parked far enough away to avoid being noticed, but close enough to observe. Brielle was gesturing angrily, while Keaton leaned against his car, looking exhausted. At one point, she threw her hands up in frustration and walked away from him, only to turn around and come back for more arguing. This went on for 20 minutes. Finally, Brielle got in her car and drove off, leaving Keaton standing alone in the parking lot. He looked older than his 40 years, diminished in a way that had nothing to do with his medical condition. My phone buzzed with a text message from Brielle. "We need to talk. Can you meet me somewhere?" I considered ignoring it, but curiosity won out. I texted back, "Coffee shop on 5th Street. 1 hour." She was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with an untouched latte and red-rimmed eyes. She looked up when I approached, and I could see the desperation she was trying to hide. "Thank you for coming," she said. I sat across from her without ordering anything. "What do you want, Brielle?" "I want to understand why you did this." "I think you understand perfectly." "No, I don't. I understand being angry about the affair. I understand wanting a divorce. I even understand wanting to hurt me back. But this," she gestured helplessly, "this is something else entirely. This is justice. This is revenge. Sometimes they're the same thing." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Keaton is sick, Rowan. Really sick. He needs care and support, not financial stress and legal complications. Then he should have thought about that before he decided to help you destroy our marriage. We fell in love. That's not a crime. No, but fraud is. Hiding assets is. Planning to abandon a sick family member for financial gain is. I never planned to abandon him." I pulled out my phone and played one of her recorded conversations with her sister, the one where she discussed inheriting Keaton's money after his condition progressed. Her face flushed. "You don't understand the context. The context is that you saw him as a financial opportunity, not a person. Now you get to live with that choice. What if I leave him? What if I just walk away from all of this? Then you lose access to the money you've been hiding, and you still don't get anything from our divorce because of the adultery evidence. Plus, you get sued for abandoning someone you've legally committed to care for. And if I stay with him? Then you spend the next few years watching someone deteriorate while bankrupting yourself to pay for his care. Either way, you pay for what you've done." Brielle started crying then, not the manipulative tears she'd used during our marriage, but genuine despair. "There has to be another option." "There is. You could have been honest from the beginning. You could have asked for a divorce instead of planning to destroy me. You could have considered the consequences of your actions before you took them." "I can't go back and change what I did." "No, you can't. But you can accept responsibility for it." She wiped her eyes with a napkin. "I never thought you were capable of something like this." "I never thought you were capable of what you did to me. I guess we both learned something new about each other." "So what happens now?" "Now you go back to Keaton's apartment and figure out how to make your new life work. You wanted to be with him, you wanted out of our marriage, you wanted a fresh start. Congratulations. You got everything you asked for." "This isn't what I asked for." It's exactly what you asked for. You just didn't think through the implications. I stood up to leave, but she grabbed my arm. Rowan, please, isn't there any way we can work something out? Some kind of compromise? I looked down at her hand on my arm, then back at her face. For just a moment, I saw the woman I'd married 12 years ago, young, hopeful, full of dreams about our future together. Then I remembered the security footage, the hidden bank accounts, the months of lies and manipulation. No, I said, gently removing her hand. There's no compromise. You made your choice, and now you get to live with it. I left her sitting in that coffee shop, crying over a cold latte and a future that had turned out very differently than she'd planned. Driving home, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Not happiness, exactly. There was nothing happy about the end of a 12-year marriage. But peace. The kind that comes from knowing that justice has been served and consequences have been faced. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. Jake's name on the screen. How did it go? He asked. Exactly as expected. She's starting to understand that there's no way out of this that doesn't cost her everything. Any regrets? I looked at my house, our house for 12 years, and thought about the life Brielle and I had built together, the dreams we'd shared, the future we'd planned. No, I said, no regrets. Good, because I just got word that Keaton's medical team wants to schedule a family meeting next week to discuss his care plan. Guess who's listed as his primary caregiver? Let me guess. Rowan Kerrick, soon to be Brielle Marin, financially responsible party and designated medical decision maker. I smiled for the first time in weeks. Perfect. She's going to hate every minute of it. That's the point. After Jake hung up, I sat in my car for a few more minutes, looking at the house I'd soon be living in alone. Tomorrow, I'd start the process of rebuilding my life. New routines, new goals, new possibilities. But tonight, I was going to order pizza, open a bottle of wine, and enjoy the quiet satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed. Brielle had wanted to play games with people's lives. Now she was discovering what it felt like to lose. Monday morning brought the kind of crisp autumn air that makes everything feel possible. I woke up in my own bed, in my own house, without having to wonder where my wife really was or what she was really doing. For the first time in months, I felt genuinely rested. My phone had 17 missed calls from Brielle and 6 voicemails. I deleted them all without listening. At work, my boss Vanessa Chen called me into her office. I'd been expecting this conversation. My performance over the past few weeks had been distracted at best. Rowan, I wanted to check in with you, she said, gesturing for me to sit across from her desk. I know you've been dealing with some personal issues. My marriage is ending, I said simply. It's been complicated. I'm sorry to hear that. Divorce is never easy. She paused, studying my face. But I have to say, you seem different today. More focused. The worst part is over. Now it's just a matter of working through the details. Good, because I have a proposition for you. Vanessa opened a file on her desk. We're expanding our forensic accounting division. It's detailed work, requires someone who can spot patterns and inconsistencies in financial records, someone who can think several steps ahead. I smiled. Sounds interesting. The position comes with a significant salary increase and the opportunity to work on high-profile cases, corporate fraud, divorce proceedings, insurance investigations. Think you'd be interested? Very interested. Excellent. We can discuss the details later this week. As I left Vanessa's office, I realized that Brielle's betrayal had inadvertently led me to exactly where I needed to be professionally. The skills I'd developed in uncovering her deception were apparently valuable in other contexts. Around noon, Jake called with an update. Keaton had another medical episode this morning, he reported. Ambulance, hospital, the whole thing. Guess who got to handle all the paperwork and insurance complications? How is he? Stable, but it's a preview of what's coming. The doctors want to discuss transitioning him to more intensive care. And Brielle? According to the hospital records, she's listed as his emergency contact and financial guarantor. She spent 4 hours this morning dealing with insurance companies and medical billing. I could picture her in that hospital waiting room, surrounded by forms and bills and the reality of what she'd signed up for. 6 months ago, she'd thought she was trading up from a boring husband to a wealthy lover. Now she was discovering what in sickness and in health actually meant. That afternoon, Emma called. I thought you should know, she said without preamble. Brielle asked me to lend her money for Keaton's medical expenses. What did you tell her? I told her that I warned her this would happen and that she was on her own. But Rowan, she's desperate. Really desperate. I've never seen her like this. How desperate? She's talking about selling her car, her jewelry, everything she owns. She's also talking about trying to get a job, which is hilarious because she hasn't worked in 8 years. What kind of job? I don't know. Something that pays well enough to cover medical bills. Good luck with that. After Emma hung up, I sat at my desk thinking about Brielle's employment prospects. She had a college degree, but no recent work experience, no professional network, no skills that translated to high-paying jobs. Even if she found something, it would take months to start earning enough to make a dent in Keaton's expenses. Meanwhile, the money she'd been hiding, the money she'd planned to use for her fresh start, was sitting in a trust fund she could only access for medical expenses. She was trapped in exactly the situation she'd tried to avoid. Wednesday brought another call from David Richardson. "We've finalized Keaton's buyout," he said. "He's officially out of the firm as of Friday." How much did he get? After taxes and legal fees, about $400,000. Sounds like a lot, but given his medical expenses, it'll last maybe 2 years. And then? Then he's completely dependent on whoever's taking care of him, which appears to be your wife. Soon-to-be ex-wife. Right. How's that process going? She hasn't filed yet. I think she's hoping to find some way out of the situation. Is there one? Not that I can see. She's legally and financially committed now. The only way out is bankruptcy, and even that wouldn't eliminate her caregiver obligations. Thursday evening, I was working late when my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see Keaton standing on my porch. He looked terrible, pale, thin, wearing clothes that seemed too big for him. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. "Hello, Keaton?" "Rowan, we need to talk." "Do we?" "Please, 5 minutes." I stepped outside, closing the door behind me. We stood on my front porch like strangers, which I suppose we were now. "I want to apologize," he said. "For what, specifically?" "For everything. For the affair, for the lies, for betraying your trust, for being a terrible brother." "Okay, apology noted." "That's it? What did you expect? Forgiveness? Understanding? A tearful reconciliation?" Keaton ran his hands through his hair. I expected you to be angry. I was angry. Then I got even. Now I'm just tired. Brielle told me what you did. The financial arrangements, the legal obligations, He paused, searching for words. "It's brilliant, actually. Ruthless, but brilliant." "Thank you." "She's drowning, Rowan. The medical bills, the insurance complications, the constant stress. She's not equipped for this." "Then she should have thought about that before she decided to be with you." "I never told her how bad my condition was. She thought she was getting a healthy, wealthy partner." "And you let her think that because it served your purposes." Keaton nodded miserably. "Yes. I was selfish and stupid and desperate not to face this alone." "Well, now you're not facing it alone. You're facing it with someone who's legally obligated to take care of you but emotionally unprepared for what that means. Seems like exactly what you deserve." "What if I released her from the obligations? What if I took full responsibility for my own care? With what money? You just spent your buyout on legal fees and medical bills. You have no income, no assets, no way to pay for the care you need." "Then what if I just handled this on my own?" I looked at my brother, really looked at him, and saw someone who was finally understanding the full scope of what he'd done. Not just to me, but to Brielle, and ultimately to himself. "You mean, what if you just gave up?" "I mean, what if I stopped being everyone else's problem?" "That's not your decision to make anymore. You involved Brielle in this situation, made her legally responsible for your care. You don't get to abandon her now just because it's inconvenient. So, we're all just trapped? You're all living with the consequences of your choices. There's a difference." Keaton stood there for a long moment, looking older and more defeated than I'd ever seen him. "I'm sorry," he said again. "I know you are, but sorry doesn't change anything. Is there any way, any possibility that we could work something out? Some kind of arrangement that doesn't destroy everyone?" I thought about that question seriously. Was there a way to resolve this situation that didn't require Brielle to sacrifice her future for Keaton's care? Some compromise that would allow everyone to move forward? "No," I said finally. "There isn't. You made choices that created this situation, and now you all have to live with the results. That's how consequences work." Keaton nodded and turned to leave, then stopped. "For what it's worth," he said, "I think you're handling this better than I would have." "I'm handling this exactly as well as you taught me to." After he left, I went back inside and poured myself a drink. Tomorrow, the divorce papers would finally be filed. Brielle would officially become my ex-wife and Keaton's full-time caregiver. The legal and financial arrangements I'd put in place would become permanent. It was almost over. Friday morning, Jake called with the final confirmation. "It's done," he said. "Divorce filed, financial transfers completed, legal obligations finalized. Brielle is now officially responsible for Keaton's care and has access to exactly enough money to pay for it, but not a penny more." "How long do you think the money will last?" "Given his condition and the projected costs, maybe 3 years. After that, she'll have to find other resources or apply for public assistance, which could require her to sell everything she owns first." "And if she tries to leave?" "She gets sued for abandonment and loses everything anyway. Plus, she'd have to pay back any money she's already spent from the trust fund." I sat back in my chair, looking out my office window at the city where I'd lived my entire adult life, where I'd met and married Brielle, where I'd built a career and a home and a life that had been systematically dismantled by the two people I'd trusted most. "Any regrets?" Jake asked, echoing his question from the week before. I thought about Brielle, probably sitting in another hospital waiting room right now, filling out insurance forms and trying to figure out how to afford medications that cost more than most people's rent. I thought about Keaton, facing a progressive illness with a caregiver who resented him, and a future that held nothing but decline and dependency. I thought about the 12 years of marriage that had ended not with honest communication or mutual respect, but with lies and betrayal and manipulation. "No," I said. "No regrets." "Good, because I have one more piece of news." "What's that?" "I've been monitoring their communications, and Brielle sent an email to her lawyer this morning. She's asking about the possibility of having Keaton declared incompetent so she can make medical decisions that would expedite his condition." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "She's talking about ending his care?" "That's how I read it. She's looking for a way out that doesn't involve years of caregiving and financial ruin." "And the lawyer's response?" "Told her that would constitute medical neglect at minimum, possibly attempted murder. She'd face criminal charges and still lose all the money." So even Brielle's darkest impulses led nowhere. Every path forward required her to face the consequences of her choices. "She really is trapped," I said. "Completely. And it's entirely her own doing." That evening, I sat in my living room with a glass of wine and the divorce papers that had been filed that morning. In a few months, the legal process would be complete, and I'd officially be a single man again. I thought about what came next. The new job opportunity, the chance to rebuild my life on my own terms, the freedom to make choices based on what I wanted rather than what someone else was secretly planning. For the first time in months, the future felt full of possibilities. My phone buzzed with one final text from Brielle. "I hope you're happy." I looked at those 4 words for a long time, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Then I deleted the message and finished my wine. Tomorrow, I would start the next chapter of my life. Tonight, I was going to enjoy the satisfaction of a story perfectly concluded. Outside, it was starting to rain again, but inside my house now, everything was exactly as it should be.